Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Create the Ripple podcast. I'm your host, Candice Smiley. Here we trust the ningle and we tell the truth. This is a podcast. We are looking to have conversations that matter, conversations that take courage to engage in, where we cut through the noise that exists online to bring you incredible content, amazing speakers, and stories to inspire you to live your best, listen to yourself, and tell the truth of who you are and who you just might become. Welcome back to another episode of the Create the Ripple podcast. I'm your host, Candice Smiley, and I'm really excited to be introducing you to our guest today, Dr. Anissa Reilly, educator. She's also the president and owner of Giant Step 6 LLC, where her primary goal and passion is to develop both national and global leaders so they can effectively lead their prospective organizations. She is the loving wife of her husband and the mother of 4 amazing young people. She's recently received proclamations from New York State Senator Jose Serrano and New York City Councilwoman Vanessa Gibson for assistance in improving the lives of people in her community. The first book in her leadership series is called 5 Buckets of Leadership, Speaking in the Moment, and was released in May 2021. We talk a little bit about this in the show, and honestly, it's going to go right on my to purchase immediately list. So check that out. Additionally, she's the host of her own show, The Ask Dr. Reilly Show, which can be found on Fox Soul Weekly. Her show, it's about 20 to 30 minutes, one-on-one session with young and mature women, and sometimes men, where they discuss traumatic issues that are faced in the inner cities. It's a living room type discussion that focuses on abuse, sexual issues like rape, domestic violence, and sexuality, and the impact that has on her community. As the host, she shares her own success story. She has received her doctorate in spite of suffering from PTSD and from issues like those she's discussed on the show, and shared her own story. She's embraced the wounded healer archetype as described by psychologist Carl Jung. The Ask Dr. Reilly Show is the first individual programming for the OSG network scheduled to stream on Dame Dash Studios and on Fox Soul. For more information, of course, we'll have all the links to connect with her and follow along with what she's up to. Her mission is to impact over 1 million women. I invite you to sit back and enjoy this incredible, incredible show. Thanks so much for listening.
Well, thank you, Candice, for having me on the show. I'm so excited to talk to your listeners and be part of the Create the Ripple movement. I'm a native New Yorker, born in the Bronx. BX stand up for all of my Bronxites out there. You know, that's one of the boroughs who don't get that much shine, but I want to put BX on the map for those of us who are from there. I am an author, a mommy, self-proclaimed God girl. I'm a principal in an elementary school, and I've been in that role for the last 16 and a half years. And I'm just a woman that's on fire to help at least 1 million women change their lives and understand that their trauma is not something that has to paralyze them, but they can experience peace and they can leverage it for triumph.
I love that. That was good. I feel like you practiced that before, but it was really good. I am fascinated with words. I always have been. And that was born largely from my own trauma story, right down to my name. So my name means glittering and glowing white. And it comes from the Bible. And she was a queen. And at the time when I felt like, I had been tarnished by what had happened to me, I really clung to that I wouldn't have been called this if it wasn't meant for something, that this was going to be transformed into something. And that really sparked this, desire to understand and know words. And I think words are so powerful. I mean, we create our world with our world. The world was created with sound, right? It's just all of these things come together. And that was one of the things that stood out for me when I was reading about your show, which I'd love us to just dive right in, because I really do want my listeners to go and check out what you're up to. Because in spite of PTSD and in spite of all of those things, you really embrace this wounded healer. And I know for myself, I always felt like I had to get there, and there's air quotes, right? Before I could lead. Rather, in the last couple of years, as I've done some deep healing work and found some grace in all of that I've been through, realizing that actually the leadership comes from, right, when you're embracing that wounded healer. So let's talk about that, because I know there's lots of other women who hold themselves back because they think they have to be something or someone before they can lead.
So I like to tell this story. I had the wonderful opportunity to be a speaker at a church at a conference with some other women. And there was one speaker whose message came from the story of Job in the Bible. And she grounded her message in the phrase, trusted with trouble. That Job's story is all about being trusted with trouble, because when God had the conversation with the enemy, God was like, have you tried my servant Job? Right? And so as she was telling that story, it resonated so deeply with me because it illuminated and it brought revelation that everything that I've been through, all of the traumas. Now, if I were to sit down and really tell you all the stuff the trouble that I've had, people will probably be like,
yeah, I felt that.
Yeah, the trouble that I had, they were like, you're not on drugs, you're not dead, you're not destitute, you don't look like you've been through anything, and you've never been committed to a mental institution. And so when I really had the time to look at that, then I heard this phrase, it all became clear to me that I was trusted with trouble. And although I wasn't at the place of full healing, when you look at the story of Job, even in the midst of his trouble, when his friends and his family and his wife was saying, turn your back on God, he was like, oh, no. And then it's only afterwards where he realized that, okay, God, you never left me. There's something in this. And then he got double for his trouble. And I realized that all that I've been through wasn't for me. God trusted me with it. So it's for someone else. And then I learned about the wounded healer archetype. And I was like, yeah.
I really love what you just said there, the trusted with trouble. And I can remember from my own story being 12 years old and at a conference and being committed to making an impact in what felt like I was being called to do, and a very clear conversation that I was going to have to go through some stuff to come out the other side. And I can remember very clearly negotiating and saying, I don't want to lose anybody. I don't want to lose my health, that sort of thing, as, we're prone to do when we're in that sort of situation and sensing the spirit in that way. And I couldn't have imagined the last 20 years. But I do really relate to this trusted with trouble, because now I come out and people say, well, you have an uncommon wisdom. And I'm like, yeah, that's because I got my teeth kicked in a few times. Yeah. Let me tell you, okay? Hard won and hard fought. And I think a lot of people have that story. Yeah. And we need to start talking about it. So on your show, it looks like you're talking to a lot of those kinds of people who have found the courage, because it takes courage to talk about those stories.
So my show is really grounded in all of my traumas. So the premise is each season is around a trauma that I personally experienced. So season 1 is around sexual trauma. But the caveat about the show is that all of my guests must have done something with that trauma. It's not about, here's my trauma, I'm just another person who experienced it. Here's my sob story. So when you finish watching my show, if that was the premise, you would be like, oh my gosh, I feel sorry for that person. Oh my gosh, there's another one. Here's another statistic, right? And so I wanted to move away from that type of storytelling and demonstrate that there are individuals out here who've embraced the trauma, recognized the trauma, and done something with it, turned the ashes into beauty.
Yes.
Right? You have to understand that this happened to me. I'm not going to get paralyzed in it, because a lot of people have gotten paralyzed in it. I've spoken to 70-year-old women who remember that 6-year-old incident, and for the last 60 some odd years have not been able to move out of that moment. It has paralyzed them and has robbed them of 60 years. And so I wanted to make sure that we show people who lived it, breathed it, still may be going through the healing process.
Yes.
Because I'm still healing too.
I know, I'm going to say, absolutely.
Don't think I'm all together, because there's moments I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah. But we understand that there is life after it, and we will no longer let it have power over us.
Over us. Yeah. I can remember very clearly because I've got a sexual assault in my history, and I didn't want to tell the story until I could tell it without all of the emotion. So until I had done the healing work for it, because I didn't want people to, like you say, get stuck in the, even empathy or sympathy or whatever it was, because that holds other people stuck, right, in my trauma. And I didn't like, no. I need to move through this. I need to find the healing from it. And it can't be sensationalized. It just needs to be like, this is part of the tapestry with which now there's a brilliance to. And I'll show you, what that looks like. So I love that you've had that distinction.
I'm glad you said that, because isn't that what we do with our scars, right? So when you think about scars in a medical term, right, when it's a wound, you really can't mess with the wound. You can't talk about the wound because the wound is still, it's open and it's sensitive, and you have to keep it wrapped up. You have to keep applying ointment to it and all that, and you can't touch it, and it's very sensitive. So you really can't do anything with it. So that's the same thing with our emotional wounds and our mental wounds. And then when it's become a scar, which we now have scars, right? It is now healed. People see it. When you watch movies and they take off their shirts and there's scars on the back, and you're like, what happened?
Yeah.
Right?
Let me tell you.
Let me tell you what happened,
Yeah.
And then you could talk about the scar because it's been healed. And so the same way with us that have had some traumatic emotional places, it's better to talk about it from the place of the scar versus the wound. So that way you're not bleeding on anybody, or affecting anybody else.
Yeah. My dad calls it that those of us who walk with a limp, we recognize those older people who walk with a limp, right? For Jacob, who wrestled with the angel and then touched his hip and he walked with a limp. And I've often felt like that, right? That I have also had my dark night of the soul. And now I walk with a limp. And very quickly, right, just as you and I are connecting, we recognize, hey, you got one too. Let's talk about that. All the years I spent hiding that limp, and now how important it is for me to talk about everything openly. And I'm often a guest on other people's podcasts, and people say, is there anything you don't want to talk about? And I'm like, no, we're good. 10 years ago, we would have talked about some stuff, but now we're good.
Freeing. I find it to be freeing.
Yes.
I really do. Because before, when I was just like, I don't want to talk about that. Now I'm just like, I'm out here now. What you want to talk about?
Yeah, exactly. And then sometimes you're like, oh, I haven't thought about that in years, but we can totally talk about that. That would be therapeutic to talk about. Someone asked me one time, they're like, when you read your story or we read your bio, what do you think? And I said, well, sometimes ego kicks in and I think, I wonder if they're judging me as they hear this story. And then by the end, so that I can see the triumph and the things that I've moved through, I'm like, I don't really care if they are, because I kind of love what I've gone through now. I love, as you say, I've been trusted with trouble. And now I look at some of the things I'm being presented with, both in terms of amazing opportunities and ongoing challenges. And I think I'm actually kind of glad that I did this, because now this new challenge in combination with this challenge, because of course life never really lets up, I know I can handle it. There's this beautiful, deep, enduring trust that I have in my own self. And I love that. And now the mission, of course, is to share that with other women, that they might hear it in my own voice and think, wow, I want that place of peace. I want that place of relief that you seem to be living and operating from. And also for my daughter and also for my son, that they might know parts of my story as is appropriate so that they can make different choices and speak up and speak out, because they're in the next generation, right? I want to raise a generation of, a woman who doesn't make other people comfortable. Because that was most of my problem. If I boil it all the way down, I didn't want to make other people uncomfortable. Right? I was raised to be a good girl. I was raised to be a nice girl. And, the etymology of the word nice is stupid. I don't want to be a nice girl. I don't want to raise a nice girl. I want to raise a girl who knows when it's appropriate to speak up, when it's appropriate to not, and to not break her spirit, because I know life's going to try its hardest for sure. So
we were talking about, when people ask you, do you traumatize yourself when you read your story? And I remember when I taped one episode, which is my episode. So part of the stream of the flow of the show is that I then turn the camera on myself and I talk about the trauma. And so in season 1, I turn the camera on myself and I talk about my sexual traumatic experience. That was the first time that I said it out loud in that way.
Right.
And I remember right before it was about to go premiere on YouTube, I started having anxieties.
Right.
I was like, oh my gosh, well, I'm so dumb. Why did I do this? Why did I do that? Right. And I started to second guess and question my choice at that moment. But there was nothing I could do about it because it was already like gone. I mean, I could have pulled the plug on the premiere, but no. But what I learned on the other side of that is that I removed the shame that was still associated with it, that I didn't even know that there was still somewhere in there. So now the spotlight was on it and it was like, well, that was easy.
Yes. Yes. And like you say, right, incredibly freeing when that shame. And now that it was out there for everybody to know, I didn't feel like it could be used against me anymore. I was like, oh, no. Everybody knows that. What else do you want to know? We can talk about whatever.
Yeah.
And I think my favorite part about that, and maybe it's the same for you, is the women are like, well, if you can do that, then I can do this. And I'm like, yes, that's exactly why.
It's all about. Yeah.
Well, you mentor people in leadership. Yeah. And I think mentorship, leadership, those are some of my favorite words because I feel like they're a lifelong thing, right? You're just always going to be working on that. So would love to talk about that. I know you've got a book, 5 Buckets of Leadership, Speaking in the Moment. Speaking in the moment. Tell me about that part.
As a leader, there are going to be times where you're going to have to speak extemporaneously. Public speaking is just part of the leadership practice. You must be able to do it and you must be able to sound like a professional. But what I have found is that some people get really anxious, nervous, and are not confident in their ability to do it. And so I'm into brain science. I really started studying the brain because trauma has a major impact on the brain. And I got into that. And what I learned is that you can hijack your brain and trick your brain when you are finding yourselves in very high stress situations. And so if you are someone who becomes highly stressed or experience extreme anxiety when it's time to publicly speak, I teach you how to reroute your neurotransmitters so that way you can speak in the moment clearly and sound like a professional every single time.
That's awesome. I'm going to have to share your book with a few women I know because the speaking part is a big deal for them. And I often talk to women and they say, well, how do you do that? Because I enjoy sales. I enjoy meeting people. I'm an introvert, so it's not like it came easily. But I just often say to them, like, just say what you're thinking. Say what you're thinking. Say what you said to me, and then say that out loud. Because the rest of the listeners or the audience or your client, they're going to have the same experience that I just did. Yeah. And so often our subconscious is communicating, and it knows when you're not telling the truth. So just tell the truth, and then you just eliminate everything else.
All the rest of the stuff. You know, when people talk about their gift and their purpose and what do they do well, you know, sometimes you think about like all these other talents. Yes, my desire is to be an actress when I was 5 years old. When you're in kindergarten, they go, what do you want to be when you grow up? And I was like, an actress, right? And so what I learned as I continue to grow is that I had the gift of leadership and the gift of developing leaders. Like that is what I can see. Like it becomes clear as day to me when I'm with someone about how to help them move in this space and to become a better leader. Like baseball players say, when a 90-mile-an-hour ball is coming their way, it comes at them in like slow motion. That is exactly how I feel when I'm in the presence of people. And I'm like, oh, I can see it. And so God has graced me with that gift of developing leaders. And then God said, well, that's your talent. So I was like, oh, what do I do with it? I can work with people because leadership coaching is needed in our world today. I have a leadership coach. He coaches me. I always talk about Michael Phelps, who was great. But when he really submitted to another coach, he made history. So, I'm in that space to help people become the best leaders they can be.
I absolutely love that. And I love that you understand what your gift and your talent is because I have always known that I'm a catalyst. Sometimes, which makes sense. I have a podcast now and we talk about challenging issues. We don't shy away from stuff that might make other people uncomfortable, but not to make them uncomfortable. Just that, yes, I know this is uncomfortable, but we're going to talk about it anyway because we need to. And how often I really sensed it when the world was shutting down in 2020. Mm-hmm. And I found myself energized. And I know that was not everybody's experience. But I had seen that happen in my life before, both when I was in nurses training or other things that when, triage needed to happen and everything else was going crazy when I was an event planner and I'd be called in 2 weeks before an event to rescue an event. And I would just know, I'm like, we need to do this. And then we need to do this. And we need to do this. And they were like, how are you so calm? And I'm like, I don't know. If it was me and where you are, be spinning out of control, but I can see what you need from the other side. So going to do that. And how often other people who didn't understand that would try to redirect or no, it's not like this, or it's not like that, or, all those different voices versus now stepping into it going, no. I'm a starter and I'm a finisher, but I will not be your middle mile. That's not my brilliance. That's not my talent. Yeah. I hire great people for that part. But if you want me to bring me in to get things started and then wrap it up, that's my job. That's my gift. And since I've really leaned into that, not just with the healing, but it's funny how the healing lent to that. And all of a sudden I could give myself permission to live and function from my genius or whatever you want to call it, that gift. It's just been magical. And now I say, oh, no, like we'll do this. And then you're on your own. I'll come back.
Yeah. And it's important to know that about yourself. Yes. And I think that gives you power to not only be in those places where you can sense the trauma coming, you can sense it starting to happen, and that your voice is like, oh, no, we're not doing that. And then not feel guilty that you had to separate yourself or just end it. And you understand your mental health is important. And so knowing who you are is part of the healing. And I had to get into that space at a time too, because at one point I was like, I thought I knew myself, right?
Yeah, I love that. What's your favorite book?
This is interesting. So, no, for real. So I read a lot, which is a great thing. But I'll always go back to Rudy Giuliani's autobiography. That's why I say it's interesting, because I'm a New Yorker. And for those New Yorkers are like, he was a mayor and that's what he did to the city. But his book has so many nuggets and gems around leadership. Because for those of us who know, he was the mayor at the time when 9/11 occurred. And he talks about everything that he went through in order to keep our city moving forward through this terrorist act. And there were so many gems that I learned from that book. And so I always find myself going back or referencing those gems that I found in his book. So yeah, that's my favorite book.
I love it. That's awesome. That's one of my favorite questions. It's a new question for me, but I'm just loving what people say and the smile they get before they're like, okay, I'm going to tell you my favorite book. It's awesome to see the humanity come out from people. What book are you reading right now?
So it's on my bedside. It's called What Happened to You? It is a book that is written in the style of an interview with Oprah Winfrey and Dr. Perry. I think that's his name. It's a book about trauma. And so Dr. Perry is, I want to say a psychologist. I may be wrong. So if I'm wrong, people, I just said I was wrong. But Oprah, at the beginning of every chapter, shares some traumatic experience that she went through and some of her guests went through. And then she commences to ask him questions around this particular subject, and he answers them. And his main thing that he wants the readers to understand is we need to change us asking people, what's wrong with you, to what happened to you. Because it's in the question of what happened to you that you begin to see them as a human and you begin to understand their experiences in that maybe 1 minute or 5 minute explanation.
That's beautiful. Okay. I was recently encouraged to read Nonviolent Communication. And it sounds very similar because, in how you change the question and how you communicate entirely changes it. This is one of these books, and I've been fascinated by words, which we already talked about. This book, I'm listening to it and I'm like, whoa, I got to pause that, because the way he put the words together, I have never considered that. And I listened to this book and this chapter on repeat, and I would consider myself to be fairly intelligent. I'm like, wait, I got to go back and I got to like heart center. Okay, now I'm going to try to listen. And it's also got this energy to it because it's his life work. And I've realized if I'm honest with myself, any of the books I would put in my, say, top 5 or top 10 come from an individual who wrote a book about their life's work or their life's passion. Because, of course, you can write a book in a weekend these days, which is fine. Lots of great nuggets in those. But I'm realizing that I'm drawn to these books where someone literally has been like, this is my passion and I want to share it with you. It's amazing.
That makes me think about, because when I was a teacher in the classroom, one of the things that I taught my students as they were developing themselves as writers is that if there are no tears for the writer, then there will be no tears for the reader. Mm-hmm. And so that's how you develop your voice as a writer, because you must make sure that you are putting your tears into your writing, because writing connects to the reader, but it only happens when there are tears for the writer.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. I'm in the middle of writing my book, so I'm like... So maybe I shouldn't, I should embrace the tears because it comes up. I'm writing a different chapter and then all of a sudden I'm like detours, which is the name of the book, detours. And I'm detouring. I'm like, I wasn't going to talk about this. This wasn't in the thing. And then I'm crying. And then I'm like, it's actually really good. Maybe I'll leave it in there. So thank you for that awareness that it's okay for me to show up in this moment and share that.
And going back to what you said about words, and we talk about, our world was framed with our words. Mm-hmm. Science has said that, galaxies are still being formed, but it's off of an energy pulse, sound.
Sound, yes.
It's still expanding from sound. Mm-hmm. So if that is what's happening, then of course, the sound and the tone and the words that we use with one another is what continues to create or destroy. So we have to be careful about that. So, yeah.
Wow. Well, I know that my listener is probably on her phone right now looking for your podcast, as I was just now, being like, I'm going to subscribe and follow. I have exceptionally enjoyed the space that we got to hold together. So thank you so much for coming on my show today. Anything else you'd like to leave my listener with?
I just want to let your listeners know that there is someone out there who can assist and help. You can get a therapist, or if you just need someone to talk who understands, you can reach out to me. I'm here to help. I'm here to freely give of my knowledge, of my experiences, because I said I have a goal to help 1 million women live their best lives in spite of their trauma. Reach out. Hopefully you can go to my website, www.axdrreilly.com. Reilly is spelled R-E-I-L-L-Y, and I spell that because it's not the common spelling.
No.
Of Reilly. Go watch the show on YouTube and connect with those women and those guests, because I give their information too. So reach out. I'm sure there's someone on one of those seasons who will speak to you, and you can reach out to them because they have a heart to help as well.
That's beautiful. Oh, thank you. And for my listeners, you know the drill. I know you're scrolling. I know you are right now, because I got hit by this one, my friend. This was beautiful. And to the rest of you, thank you so much for listening. I appreciate you being here, and we'll catch you on the flip side.